Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this meeting of the Council of the Town of Oakville. I invite everyone to join Council in rising to give O Canada. God grant us understanding and patience, that justice, truth, and honesty may be evident in our decisions. Make us mindful of the needs of the people throughout the town of Oakville. Help us govern with the wider community in mind, and so create in us a desire for progress and responsible action. We ask this in your name. Amen. We will now have a moment of silence. Thank you, everyone. Madam Clerk, do we have any regrets this evening?
No, Mr. Mayor, there are no regrets this evening.
Too few to mention. All right. Council, are there declarations of pecuniary interest? Councillor Adams.
I don't have any declaration of pecuniary interest for this evening's meeting. However, last Monday, April 30th, I missed the meeting as a result of a family medical issue. And on that evening, I would have declared an interest in items C4, 2, and 2A and the related bylaw 2012-027 as they related to items which TDL Group have an interest or have expressed an interest, and my wife works for TDL Group.
Which agenda?
Planning and development last.
That's the April 30th minutes.
Okay.
So there's no need to separate anything this evening. It's just as per the requirements, I'm notifying of something that I would have had an interest in on that evening.
Thank you, Councillor. With that, I'll ask how you'd like to deal with your minutes. Councillor Johnston, seconded by Councillor Duddick, moves approval of the minutes, being the minutes of the regular session of Council April 16th, the confidential minutes of the closed session of Council April 16th, the minutes of the regular session of Council April 30th, as noted by the Councillor. Confidential minutes of the closed session of Council April 30th. All in favor? Opposed, if any? The minutes are adopted. That brings us to our delegations. And Madam Clerk, would you call the first listed delegation?
Our first delegation is Gillian Manchester, here as Chair of the Accessibility Advisory Committee, along with David Cole, Vice Chair, regarding item 6 of the Administrative Services Committee of May 1st.
Thank you. Mr. Cole?
Evening. Gillian unfortunately is not here, so I guess I get to do the whole thing. So. Maybe. Here we go. What I'd like to do this evening is we were scheduled to do our status. We had our status report due at the administrative committee meeting that we got forwarded to tonight, so I believe you all had a copy of the status report from our last meeting. So we think we've had a pretty good year this past year, and the presentation's broken into two pieces, and I'm assured I'll stay under 10 minutes. But first piece is just a recap of the status of our committee. The second, we thought, we put together a little presentation about exactly what goes into a site plan review. And I'm not sure how many people know what we do in the site plan review, so we thought we'd give you a little update on that, if that would work for you. So just a little bit of a reminder, the Oakville Accessible Advisory Committee mandate, as we see it, is to review town facility services and programs to address equal access to people. And again, this is for the commercial side of the development that we do. The act as a commenting body to municipal facility services and programs is what we engage in. Again, the site plan review is one of these. Consult with the public at least once a year and prepare an annual report to the council, which we've submitted, and consult with the planning and services staff on site plan applications at this point. High points for 2011. We actively connected with projects identified in the accessibility plan, for instance, the 16-mile sports complex, the quad pad, town's new transit facility located at 430 Wyckoff Road, Glen Abbey Recreation Center, Iroquois Ridge Recreation Center, and the new hospital. And just this week we went to the QE2 Park, which was very interesting. Again, high points for 2011. We recommended to council that accessible design guidelines be adhered to as a higher standard to ensure that the accessibility is included in the future zoning bylaws. And the reason that we submitted that is that in one of the planning meetings we attended, in some cases our 2008 guidelines are slightly higher than the building code. So we wanted to make sure where we could that we would go to the higher standard which was in our guidelines. And again, thank you, you approved that. Review and provide feedback to staff regarding accessibility of new Town of Oakville website prior to official launch. We were fortunate in getting a slight preview of that. A couple of our members have expertise in that area, so we got to pass on some comments on the new Oakville website. Working groups we have involved include the community awareness, site planning review, and standards group. So we focus our work in those three areas. Site plan review working group has been increasingly active in its review, and I'll give you some statistics on that when we get there. And one of the things that we did change is that we now review any plans that are over 500 square meters. That's an increase or a decrease in the size from 2,500. So, and I'll speak to that. Progress so far in 2012. Have and will continue to attend local events such as the ice cream with Councillor Allen and Ralph at Bronte. Thank you for inviting us again. And it was fun to be there last time. Actively network with local agencies to secure some community spirit candidates. So we've been looking at various agencies within Oakville, like Community Living and those that support people with disabilities, for the candidates for Oakville's Accessibility Spirit Award. And again, we were fortunate to participate in the Rick Hansen 25th Anniversary Wheels in Motion Oakville event at 16 Mile Creek Sports Complex, and Melissa Velasco, our prior chair, was involved in that event. The Standards Working Committee, which gets involved in looking at the facilities after they've been built and walk through with accessibility in mind, completed on-site visits at Glen Abbey Recreation Center, the newly retrofitted Woodside Library, Iroquois Shore Ridge Facility, and Garlock Gardens. We have scheduled visits to new Queen Elizabeth Community and Cultural Center, which we completed this past week, and very impressed with that. So, Site Plan Review Working Group has been very active, and what I'd like to do is skip over this piece until I get to do this breakdown on what we've actually done. But so far in 2012, we've completed 5 reviews, and we have 4 more under review at the moment. So they're keeping us busy. What we like to do is highlight the fact that accessibility benefits everybody, visible and invisible disabilities. We have an aging population. I think it's important that we consider inclusion in all of the social aspects of what we do in the community. Again, the committee does that. We managed to snap a few pictures. I know you like pictures and presentations, so this is from the ice cream Fun in the Sun. But you'll notice that it was very well attended by people with accessibility challenges and by the younger generation. Here's an example, if you haven't seen it, of an accessible picnic table. And again, I'd like to see more of those. Again, there was a ramp access there. We did a tour of the downtown last year, and it always comes up, is it expensible to revamp any existing stores? And 2 stores we visited in particular have done the transition. Ron White Shoes has an accessible ramp and an accessible doorway that seemed very straightforward and easy to get into, and it didn't look like a very costly modification. Again, the automatic door feature was very straightforward to use, just inside the door. Olson's in downtown Oakville, they have an accessibility entrance. Their change rooms and washrooms are also designed internally for accessibility. And again, ramp up from the sidewalk and the automatic doors, fairly straightforward. Just a couple of quick snaps, very impressed with QE Park 2. You can see here that we have the accessibility parking spots. That's one of the major things that we comment on in the site plan review. And when we write comments as to we want some visual differentiation, again, QE Park 2 has done that with the pathways across the parking lot, so you can actually see a differentiation there. How am I doing? Okay. Any questions on that while I switch modes here? Or should I not allow questions? Okay, so this is a working group update. The members are Gillian Manchester, our chair, myself as vice chair and lead of the working group, Rosa Bustamante, who is a Burlington city planner that lives in Oakville, and Adam Spencer, who works for an organization that does digital image transfers, PDFs, making them accessible. So we have good representation there. Our call to action, broadening understanding the role of the Accessibility Advisory Committee Site Planning Work Group, and again, this is focused at the Site Planning Work Group, to increase awareness of the benefits to the community, continue to build internal department support for our initiatives related to accessibility, play a strong role in future commercial development within Oakville. Again, what we do when we get involved in the accessibility review, we do the plans larger than 500 square meters. The working group will review the following types of site plan drawings. Elevation drawings, just for the general look and texture of the outside of the building. A site plan detail, which gives us stuff like curb cut depth and things like that. Architectural detail, again specifying the look and feel of some of the exterior stuff. And I must remind you, at this point, we only review the outside. One of the things that we really would like to do is start looking inside. So we also look at the ecosystem and drainage. Oddly enough, sometimes they put drain grates in the wrong place, which makes it a challenge. Exterior lighting, again, is a large example of what we do. I don't know if you've ever seen one of those, but they give you a nice large drawing with a bunch of little dots all over it, and it gives you the foot candles per dot. And what we're looking for is 3-foot candles per dot around accessible items and 9-foot candles per dot for doors and one-ways. Plans typically come in with around 2. So. Parking and pedestrian flow. And again, landscape design. Designing the landscape so that somebody with impaired vision can find their way through the maze of things up into the doors and the access ways. Here is a quick sample of what we submit. You can see here that I have a covering letter. We go through by section, and we cover ground floor surfaces, entrances, doors. Again, my team's comments on each of the drawings that were given, covering each of these following areas. including passenger loading zone, landscape plantings, existing lighting, materials, finish, and text colors. So that gives you a little bit of an example. Here's a sample, one of the early ones we did. You can see here that we have parking. This is the revised one. And just because I know you like PowerPoint, there's a before and after. So you can see, typically we make curb cuts wider, we make parking lots wider and deeper, and we give more space in between for them to load and unload. And sorry, I want to go back. We asked earlier to be involved earlier. We find that these changes at this point in time are simple if we do it at the right time. If you come back to these people after the fact and they've got everything laid out, it becomes very hard for them to modify and incorporate the things. So again, getting involved in early I think is important. And I see that I'm out of time. Here's one of the more complex ones we did, Great Lake Marketplace. Anybody involved in that one? And of course, the effects of zooming in on the accessible parking spots, catching the traffic flow, and that was hard, and the Oakville Hospital. Just an example of the site plan details. Here's the stats that we did last year. 12 applications with 48 plus drawings reviewed. Typically it's 3 to 4 hours of effort per week, effort per plan per member. In this case, the 2 that we didn't respond to were stuff that had no accessibility issues. So pretty much everything else we've sent comments in on. They've adopted our changes as requested. Future impact, I'll just put them up for you. Again, we want to get into doing interior stuff. One of the high points, I guess, for our committee was that when we submitted our comments to the hospital engineers, Ellis Don, they actually hired a consultant to reply to our report. So he called me and went through, and the consultant they hired was actually the guy that helped write our guide. So that's good. Sorry for going over the time.
Thank you very much for your report. Questions, Council? Councillor Adams?
Quick question. You're looking at a bunch of site plans that are coming in. What are the rules around retail, particularly developments that are existing? Is there a requirement like we have that they have to comply with a set of standards at some date in the future?
They
Or
have
not
been
yet?
submitting major modifications. I don't know that there's a specific rule. Like I said, we formed a pretty good relationship with the planning department. If they think we should know about it, they send it to us.
Very good.
Councillor Khan?
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you very much for your presentation. And this just follows up on what Councillor Adams was saying. From your presentation, it appears that you're only looking at new projects. Are you not looking at retrofits right now?
Yes, we've looked at, I think, 2 retrofits. One was a school, and again, there was not much to comment on that. But there was one major retrofit on a school.
And your guideline went from 2,500 meters square to 500 meters square. How did you come to that decision? Was that mandated, or was that something that you decided internally?
The committee looked at, I guess we had some input from some people in the planning department that said, in order to catch the strip malls and things like that, we should probably lower it to 500 square meters.
So
Now, in hindsight, that increased our workload.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned strip malls, because 500 meters squared, I think most retail outlets in downtown Toronto would be at the most 500 feet squared.
Yeah.
So do you not look at them for retrofit? And do you have any idea what % of our retailers downtown Oakville would provide accessibility?
I don't have an idea, maybe the local councillor. I know that we only visited 2 or 3 facilities down there that were identified. One of the challenges has become, if you put, like what happened in Toronto, if you put accessibility ramps on the side, on public property, you get into trouble. So you have to incorporate it inside your own footprint. And that may be scaring some people off, I don't know. But to answer your question, we haven't been reviewing any of the ones from downtown Oakville yet.
Councillor Giddings.
Thank you, Mr. Cole, for your ongoing efforts. as I'm on the committee now, I see firsthand the number of hours and the care that you and the team put into it. You mentioned that increased awareness would be of benefit to the committee. Now's your chance. Is there anything that you could see council doing in support of that, to support your efforts?
A budget would be nice. I think that we are reviewing the material that's available. I submitted to our committee a brochure that the City of Niagara has put together about accessible sites. And I know that we're moving towards being the livable Oakville. I'm hoping that accessibility would be included in there. And we've asked for things like an inventory of accessible sites that, both for local community and potentially drawing in some outside people. That's just a start. But we have, I think, one brochure.
Is there, we've started inviting senior staff members to our committee meetings, and that has gone over very well, and we're being able to interact with the various departments. Do you want to discuss or mention briefly 2025?
I think our hope is, as we pointed out in the presentation, the earlier that we're involved, the easier it is to swallow the pill for accessibility. And we found out that there's an awful lot of departments within the organization working on accessible items. And we're just now becoming aware of those. But again, being able to be involved in a lot of the forward planning. Things like, I don't know if anybody's aware of the process, but if you come in and you want to get a commercial building permit, you go to the building department and you get a package, right? Nowhere in there does it mention that you'll be looked at from an accessibility point of view in that handout. So to me, it's a simple change that if we just put a reference in there to the accessibility guidelines and say, I know a lot of the planners have now put a section into their responses that deals with accessibility directly. So again, forewarned is forearmed. If somebody's coming in for a permit and wants to know how to get a site plan or something, it would be nice to have that identified early in those documents so they know what's coming.
Thank you very much. Consider the seed planted well. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Giddings. Councillor Robinson?
Thank you, Your Worship. Good evening, David. Thank you for being here. Two things. One is, a number of years ago, the committee held an open house or a fair or a trade show or an event in one of the atriums to try to get people to come out and become familiar and more aware with what was going on. But the attendance of the public and the councillors was very, very poor. Have you ever given any thought to redoing that in a different fashion and try and get some more involvement?
As a matter of fact, we've been talking to MediChair about potentially getting a wheelchair involved and have people come in and try to navigate a course with a wheelchair provided by MediChair. They've offered that up for us. To give you some ideas about accessing the fountains, we're also going to talk to CNIBC about some things for poor visibility. But yes, that's one of the things that we'd like to do. Thank you for mentioning that.
And one other thing, Your Worship, if you would give me the latitude just to make a comment. I was on that committee for a long time, and it was a constant struggle to get the issue of the site plan that you spoke about to quite an extent here this evening, to get it working. And I think I got to congratulate you and the chair for putting it in the position that it's in now, because it seems to me that it's now starting to finally happen. So thank you and congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Any others? Mr. Cole, thank you very much for your service. Mr. Green.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. To the members of committee, one of the things that we've been looking at as staff are all the activities with respect to accessibility that all the various individual departments are. In fact, they've been reporting over the last couple of months to the executive management team. One of the things we realized is that there were a lot of silos. And so tomorrow, as a matter of fact, at 1 o'clock, we're kicking off. I've brought together a staff team to ensure that communications is working internally and with the committee, and I'll be actually kicking that off with staff tomorrow at 1 o'clock.
Thank you very much, Mr. Green.
must have missed the invite.
I'm sure council and the committee are very reassured to hear that. Councillor Graham.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. Seeing how we've opened this up to staff, a comment made earlier was that with site plan, you can see the outside, but you can't see the inside, and it's, as a member of site plan committee, that's the problem that we have too, but in so much as it's great that we can get the accessibility from the outside, it'd be nice to see it happen on the inside as well. So just through to staff, is there some way that we can get some of the plans from the interior of a building to show to the committee so that they can take a look at that and just ensure that there's an ability to move within the building as well?
Through you, Mayor Burton, is certainly something I'll follow up with staff on.
We actually have a presentation in our next meeting this week from his staff on that very topic. So, but if they file an interior drawing with me, they get commented. So.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much, Mr. Cole, for your service and your report.
Thank you.
Madam Clerk, the next registered delegation.
The next delegation is Mr. Brian Hopkins, here on behalf of the Halton chapter of Fair Vote Canada regarding the ward boundary review final report, which is item 1 on tonight's agenda.
Welcome, Mr. Hopkins. Council looks forward to your information.
Yes, thank you. This review is an important task, and before I begin my regular comments, I wanted to note that on page 13, that's page 15 in your agenda, or 59 in your agenda tonight, page 13 of the final report, that there is, I believe, a mathematical error. So I pointed that out to the mayor and my councillors today, that the FPT for Ward 6 in 2021 should be 42,025, not 45,025. So this review was initiated because of the perceptible and inequitable discrepancies in the size of the electorate and population of the existing 6 wards. No ward system design can uniformly meet all of the guiding principles set out for this review. The question is how far from the ideal is acceptable. To the extent possible, I believe that each of the wards should have reasonably equal population totals, to the extent possible. A degree of variation is acceptable, but the 25% set out for this review is so broad as to risk our choosing an option that perpetuates the imbalances which prompted this review in the first place. To go beyond that 25% would definitely perpetuate the unfairness we currently suffer. So there are 3, I believe, recommended options before you. Are these options all equally acceptable? From the viewpoint of local democracy, each ward should have about the same population. Ideally, in a 6-ward system, each ward should include about 17% of the total population. The percentage of the population by ward in 2016 and 2021 indicates that option 1A is the best fit, while option 3A/4A is the least satisfactory in living up to this measure of democracy. That is, 1A has a range from 14 to 19% of population. 4C is 14 to 21, and 3A is 14 to 23. So a broader range, not as close to the 17 ideal as some. Option 3A, 4A, and I'll refer to it just as 3A from now on, includes a Ward 5 that is far outside the 25% range of tolerance for 2016 and 2021. Ward 5 would be nearly 40% above the optimal. Furthermore, Ward 5 would be 63% larger than the smallest ward in 2016 and 69% larger in 2021. Ward 6 is the next largest at 37% in 2021. None of the wards are projected to be within the 5% optimal range. These factors that I've mentioned in themselves should make this option an unacceptable choice. Option 4C is projected to have 3 wards in the optimal range and 3 wards about 10 to 15% below the optimal size in 2016. However, Ward 4 exceeds, well, I might get a number wrong there. Anyways, however, Ward 4 exceeds the optimal size by over 20% and is 30% larger than the smallest ward. By 2021, wards 4 and 6 are appreciably larger than the other 4 wards. Compared to the smallest ward, Ward 4 is 47% larger, and Ward 6 is 34% larger. Ward 5 would be close to the optimal size, but the other 3 wards would fall 10% or more below the optimal size. While preferable to option 3A, option 4C remains less than fully acceptable in my mind. Option 1A has 5 of the wards within 10% of the optimal size by 2016. The proposed Ward 4 would have the smallest population. By 2021, only 1 of the 6 proposed wards would be more than 10% outside of the optimal. Ward 3 would be 24% larger than the smallest ward in 2016, but this number falls to 9% by 2021, so it's evening out. By 2021, only Ward 6, at 27% larger than the smallest ward, would be more than 20% larger than the, would be more than 20% larger than the smallest ward. So you can see that some of the comparables here. In 3A, we've got wards that are 63%, 69%, 37% larger than the smallest ward. In 4C, we've got some that are 37%, 47%, 34%. We get some slightly smaller numbers. But 1A, we're down to only 1 ward by 2021 having over 20%, being over 20% larger than the smallest ward, and that number is 27% it comes in at. I'd like to just repeat again in 3A, there exists wards that are outside the tolerance range, so it's really, this option should just be thrown out in my opinion. For me, 1A is the preferred option. Note that this option also clears up the long-standing imbalance between north and south, with 2 wards that are entirely south of the QEW having total populations almost exactly 1/2 of the total population of the 4 wards in the north throughout the period 2016 to 2021. The objective of this ward boundary review, I remind you, is to arrive at an effective and equitable system of representation with particular reference to the growth in North Oakville and overall projected growth up to 2022. I would like to have seen greater consideration of population as a factor in determining the ward boundary options. In seeking to become more effective, let us remain mindful of becoming more equitable. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hopkins. Are there questions for the delegation? Thank you very much for your information.
Yeah, thanks.
Madam Clerk, the next delegation.
Next delegation is Ms. Pamela Knight, here speaking on behalf of Coronation Park Residents Association, also regarding the ward boundary review, item 1 on tonight's agenda.
Welcome, Ms. Knight. Council looks forward to your information.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of council. I'll be brief. I'm here to speak this evening, speak in favor of a concept rather than a specific option. When we look at all the choices outlined in the final report, we see that each one of them comes with its own challenge. The element of effective representation is indeed a crucial point, and in many ways it goes hand in hand with the protection of communities of interest in neighborhoods. It's clear that the new proposed ward boundaries in some areas will create challenges in terms of how residents identify with their ward and how councilors will deal with neighborhoods that exhibit entirely different characteristics. Not only in terms of housing configuration and age, but as well with the issues that confront it. Pressures like infill and redevelopment in juxtaposition with issues of infrastructure. However, in order to meet the province's requirement, it's clear we must find solutions. Perhaps a more important aspect of the review is the fact that the largest portion of growth in the town over the next decades will come from the area north of Dundas. Thus, a pivotal factor of this exercise seems to suggest that we satisfy that requirement while still maintaining effective representation in other parts of the town. Like Oakville, Milton, and I guess Halton Hills as well, we'll see ongoing expansion over the next several years as directed under the Provincial Places to Grow initiative. A natural outcome would suggest that the size and structure of Halton Regional Council will change as well. After all, the components within can't grow and change without the overall outside reflecting it as well. With that in mind, we feel the correct approach is for Oakville to establish a framework now that will accommodate growth and be prepared for the time when inevitable change takes place at the regional level. Whether the final choice is option A, 7A, or option 7B, a 7th ward with its southern boundary as Dundas Street, we feel fits the bill. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your information. Questions? Councillor Adams?
Thank you very much for joining us this evening. I take it you've gone through all the various options and maps that are in the report, and you said you were satisfied with either 7A or 7B, the ones that are, for those who are following along on page 57 or 58 of the report itself, or 103, 104 of the agenda. So in terms of the configuration of those northern wards, would you be satisfied if we waited until we saw more closely what the development pattern was like in the north?
Yeah, from my personal standpoint as a resident, I think that it really takes some time to look at that entire area and decide which of those two scenarios would make most sense. I guess I see it as just most important that we address that issue now, looking forward, and recognize that we probably need that 7th ward, and then decide exactly how it should be allocated.
So rather than make a temporary choice and switch twice, do it once?
Yeah, if that's possible. I mean, if it's possible to allocate a 7th ward and then decide its actual position later, that would certainly be my suggestion.
Okay, thank you very much. I've been looking to try to determine whether or not Oakville could receive that additional representation of the region, and your feedback on how to deal with it at the local level is helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Knight.
Thank you.
All right, Madam Clerk, thank you. That's the end of the delegations. That brings us, Council, to our standing committee reports. I'll ask you we have a declaration of pecuniary interest in the Administrative Services Committee report, and I know of no difficulty with the Community Services Committee report, nor with the confidential report of the closed session of the Administrative Services Committee report. Councillor Knoll.
I just wanted to formally go on record with my declaration. I forgot to do it during the appropriate juncture on the agenda, so I'll just state that I would appreciate a separate vote be taken with respect to the Kerr Street Village BIA budget. I am the CEO and majority shareholder of a company which is located within that BIA area and a member of that association.
Okay, we'll do that. So could I have a motion from someone and a second? Councillor Robinson, Councillor Duddock, and that'll be for all three reports. And we will separate the Kerr Street BIA budget, and we'll vote on all of it except for the Kerr Street BIA budget. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. And now we'll vote on the Kerr Street BIA budget. Councillor Knoll not participating. All those in favor? And opposed? And that carries. I'm not sure what I missed down there, but I guess if it wasn't important, I don't need to. That brings us to, I think, discussion items. Now, council, in order to be kind and respectful of the time of Oakville Hydro, it was suggested by several of you to me that we move consideration of the Oakville Hydro D2 and confidential item C1 ahead of the ward boundary item. And to do that, I need a motion, Councillor Elgar, and a second, Councillor Knoll. And this is for both items. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? They are carried. And thank you, Oakville Hydro, for being here. And it's okay, you won't disturb us if you leave now, as long as you don't go by inches. That's in honor of your father. All right, now that brings us to discussion item number 1, which is the ward boundary review final report. And I believe that we should turn our attention now first to our clerk, Kathy Best.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You have been presented this evening with the final report of Dr. Williams, who is our consultant for the ward boundary review. Dr. Williams will be overviewing his report with you and addressing his conclusions in the report in just a couple of minutes. Council tonight is being requested to actually adopt a configuration for the 2014 municipal election. At this point in time, we're asking for a 6-ward configuration. You have been supplied with 7 ward options for future, which of course we would deal with at the relevant time after regional representation may or may not be amended. And upon conclusion tonight and council reaching a decision, we will bring forward the bylaw, which is required under the legislation for consideration and passage at the May 28th council meeting. So with no further ado, I will introduce Dr. Williams to you.
Thank you, Your Worship, members of council. I think I know what I'm doing here. Where am I? Hello. What's going on? Yes, it's... Okay, let's get something going. Can I get that to open? No, there we are. Okay. Great. I think we're good. Oh, there we are. Okay. Good. Always takes a minute to get the technology going. I should just say, as I begin here, that I have been very happy to be involved in this project in Oakville, and I do hope that we can come to a reasonably quick solution tonight to all this. I know it's an important question, and I don't mean to short-circuit it, but I hope that what we provided will allow for a decision reasonably effectively. I would just want to say quickly, though, that I have very much appreciate the support that I've had in this project from David, our Timco, who developed all of the maps for us and did a lot of the provided the data. I think I made the typo that was referred to a few minutes ago, but he developed the numbers, and we thought we'd caught all of those along the way. But Kim Gallioni and Kathy Best also been very helpful in getting us through to where we are tonight. So you have a final report that is following on the directions that Council provided at the special meeting in February, where we had a long discussion of some of the ideas that I had presented in the preliminary report. The starting point, of course, is that Council did put a priority on the 5 guiding principles and ranked the 3 that are noted there as the most important to consider in coming up with a recommendation. Effective representation, the protection of communities of interest in neighborhoods, and the consideration of physical features as natural boundaries. Those were not the only principles that we looked at, but they were to be considered as the priority. Council also articulated that a 25% variance from optimal population size would be acceptable. That is the practice in Canada. The Council's direction made that more explicit, and then so therefore meant that there would be wider variation in some of the options that were presented. We also were asked to look more carefully at recognizing 16 Mile Creek and Trafalgar Road as ward boundaries where possible, and so our work since February has involved applying those ideas. The net result of that, of course, is that we had originally 4 options that came in the preliminary and the interim report, plus something that we labeled Map 1 that Council asked us to review. So the 5 were there and were given the more thorough analysis. Each of those 5 was then subject to further review, where we looked at what was in there, and applying these perspectives, we ended up with 11 different designs to look at. Now, clearly 11 is a very big number to get through to try to evaluate in any effective way, and to that extent the report is as large as it is because I did have to spend the time going through each of those, even those that in the end we decided to set aside. I felt it's important to know why they were set aside and how they related to the designs that we did decide to move forward. So after that analysis then, 3 options were judged to be suitable as if you will, still on the table. Option 1A, Option 4C, and what we called Option 3A, 4A as explained in the report. The others, while they had varying merits, were for various reasons we decided that they would not be worth bringing forward as a platform to build a new ward system on. And in all cases, these evaluations were done within the context of the guiding principles that had been set out in both the interim report and the final report. And for ease of understanding, at least I hope it was, we developed the chart and the summary descriptions that were used throughout, so that the chart table rather on page 7 in the report itself is a way to summarize how those ideas were understood and would be applied in the 11 scenarios that were there for consideration. Option 1A, and this version of it shows you the numbers as described with the optimal scenarios highlighted in red on there. As we see that there is clearly change over time. The provision I felt for the criteria were generally good. The one that was probably less successful was the 2011 population, but that's really a benchmark for moving forward. And I suppose on a very, I might call it superficial level, it does look, the word 4 does look a bit odd at the moment, but we know it will grow into a more heavily populated area in the short term. It doesn't look terribly effective, but by the time the next election comes along, it will be a more successful configuration. 4C picks up a little bit on the points we heard a few moments ago. This really does allow for better representation in the subsequent elections. I should, in fact, just go back quickly to the other scenario. Of course, in 1A, again, was alluded to in a previous presentation. The 2 wards south, the 2 lakeshore wards, roughly a third of the population, and 4 wards with 2/3 of the population. A deliberate attempt to provide that kind of, if you will, population balance. 4C, again, coming back to the reference to making greater use of 16 Mile Creek, does that and creates 3 wards along the lakeshore with a Ward 2 that in what we might call I suppose a J configuration, a horizontal J figure coming from the lake, crossing the Queen Elizabeth Way and going out to the west, and then using the Queen Elizabeth Way for the other areas, maintaining boundaries that are fairly well established and providing, I think, a good balance of population in the long run. The numbers are very hard to pin down in the future, but we worked with what we had and felt that this, in the shorter term, was a manageable arrangement. Gets a little more difficult in the longer term, but then we get folded into the problem of a possible 7th ward and the question of when, indeed, population growth might require another re-examination in any event. 3A, 4A captures much of the same area to the south as the previous one, but creates differences largely in the use of Trafalgar Road and 16 Mile Creek. And in this case, 16 Mile Creek is essentially a boundary from top to bottom, if you will, in the town, dividing it, dividing wards on one side or the other. The hidden part of that is that the population itself is not 50-50 on either sides of the creek, but if that idea of using it as a very clear delineation is important, then this is a scenario that I felt would be viable for what the town needs. From there, then, as you know, we provide 2 designs, which and the numbering is going to keep everybody confused, but we suddenly jumped to 7A and 7B because it's about 7 wards. But we felt that these were possibilities that could mean an adaptation for an additional seat with a minimum of disruption. In other words, in fact, a very small adjustment to the wards, and that was not an unimportant part. 7A is largely a spin-off from 3A, 4A, and offers, as you can see, that 16 Mile Creek boundary is maintained, and the 7th ward is carved out east of that, north of Dundas. And then the 7B is closer to the 4C option, where we use the entire area across to the 8th line, I think it is, for a boundary. In both of those cases, of course, what's relevant is when the growth takes place, which areas infill first, and how how an adaptation would be made. When we assume, I think, going into this, that this will not happen by 2014. So we're looking at a choice for 2014, and then an option that could be used if that decision is made subsequent to that time. So again, this is not, I hope, a case of saying, why did we do this? Nothing works. In fact, this is not an exact science. None of the configurations successfully met, and I emphasize, all of the guiding principles in their entirety. They all have strengths, but they all have weaknesses. And that's going to happen when we look at a town with this kind of physical layout, with the distribution of population, the historical connections, all of those things, trying to make that fit means that we can't just simply draw lines up and down and it'll all fit. So, as I have suggested here, you need to look at the options that are here and weigh up those priorities. You've given me some guidelines as to what you believe should be at the top of the list, and I encourage you to look at these options as they capture those ideals as articulated in the guiding principles. Those were guiding principles that this council adopted. Those should be the points that you come back to. I believe that the 3 that I put forward come a long way toward meeting them in different ways, and that unfortunately is part of the choice you have to make. Which one, in your view, allows you to get to a system that meets those expectations in a way that will serve the community well over the next, we hope, 2 to 3 elections. So that's my formal presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You appear to have engendered at least a question or two. Councillor Khan.
Thank you very much for your report and all the effort that you've put into this. I'm just a little confused about the options 7A and 7B that you referred to. Are you suggesting that we pick one of the 3 that you mentioned earlier, and if we do go to 7 wards, then we switch again to 7A or 7B?
I think what I have in mind here is that we wanted you to know that there was a possibility of going to a 7-ward system with a minimum amount of disruption. And either of those could get you to that. The amount of change that would happen to get to that is fairly small, we believe, out of the 3 that I've offered. So I don't believe that the recommendation is to pick one of those 2 right now. But it's to show you that it is possible to get to that without having to go through this whole exercise all over again. So that was my intention there.
But then again, it's possible to be doing ward changes twice within 1 year.
Well, I don't believe that's what we had in mind, Councillor. What we had in mind was a system that would work in 2014, and that because all indications are that Regional Council will not provide an extra seat by then, so 2014 will be there. If an extra seat is allotted after 2014, a change could be made to one of those 3 that would probably only involve, at best, 2 of the existing wards. So that a large part of the town would not go through a second change. The change would only come, indeed, where all the growth is going on. That was what we tried to capture in the designs that we offer as 7A and B. Essentially to say, when the time comes, you can do that without having to engage in a full-scale review. Okay?
Councillor Johnston?
Thank you for all your hard work in this. You mentioned it would last 2 or 3 elections, so we'd have to go through this again in
well,
22. Is that what you're looking at?
I'd have to go back to my terms of reference here, but I think the intent was to have a system that would remain in place for a time. The reality is that under Ontario legislation, boundary review, ward boundaries are not subject to periodic review. They are essentially discretionary, not mandatory. However, when a town is growing at the pace that Oakville is growing, and when the growth is taking place in some areas, lines that were drawn, or lines that are adapted in 2012, will probably not be fully effective if we go past another 3 elections. I'm suggesting that just as the lines that were drawn in 1990 don't work in 2012, you have to step back and look at it. So, yeah, if you decide on a set of boundaries now, at the moment, legislation would not require you to do it, but I suggest that in terms of workload, in terms of citizens feeling badly served, you're probably going to have to look at it again. So I know you weren't asking about the previous question, but the idea was then, if that is needed in a shorter term, it could be done without having to redo everything.
Thank you. Again, thank you for all your hard work. I'll give you a motion at the appropriate time.
Councillor, thank you. Councillor Giddings.
Thank you. Looking at specifically 4C and 3A, 4A, curious as to your opinion in terms of if and when a 7th ward were put in place, and looking at the growth estimates in terms of population, do you have an opinion or a sense of which you feel would be more accurate in terms of the population estimates you went through?
Well, as I've often said, I'm not very good at predicting the future. I have a lot of trouble even predicting the past sometimes, but I think the scenarios, I think you've got to think about where you think the growth is going to happen first, because the shift from one of those to one of the 7s will depend on which of the areas grow faster. And indeed, some of that, there's comments in there about where the communities really lie, because we don't know yet where they're going to happen first and what the details are going to be in terms of traffic patterns and all those kinds of things. So, you know, in reality, I don't have a strong feeling one way or the other about which of those would work better. I think if you look at the numbers, that one of them, for example, the 4C, comes out, you know, 5 out of 6 are in pretty good shape by 2016. So making the move might be better out of that one. But until we know where that growth's going, I'm sorry, I can't tell you definitively one is going to work better than the other.
I appreciate your comments, and I agree. although in both scenarios, the addition of a seventh ward is somewhat seamless.
That was our goal in trying to develop this. And again, working with Dave and Kim and Kathy in our brainstorming around it, we tried to look at a way that the change would happen with a minimum disruption to most electors, that it would be concentrated in that growth area. And maybe that's not fair to them, but if that's where the growth's going to happen, then I think we want to be fair to those communities in that adjustment. So it is intended to make it, as you put it, as seamless as possible.
Last question. This may be better off for Clerk Best. Had a lot of comments and questions from people saying, we're talking 2.5 years away. Why do we have to go through this now? So perhaps, Clerk Best, you would be the best person to give us some timelines or what exactly is involved in the implementation.
Thank you, Councillor Giddings, through Mr. Mayor, through you to the Council. The actual process involved in a ward boundary reconfiguration is extensive. Once Council has adopted the boundaries and you've passed the bylaw, there is a 45-day appeal period to that bylaw. That bylaw can be appealed to the Ontario Municipal Board. If Council passes the bylaw on May 28th, as we hope it will, the last date for appeal would be July 12th, 2012. That bylaw would then be filed with the OMB, and an OMB hearing would have to take place. We don't anticipate that we would get that hearing for closer than 6 months out, so we're getting a hearing towards the end of this year. As that's going forward, staff is required to draw up all the voting subdivisions that are required to put everybody into a configuration that we can actually have the voting registered for in the 2014 election. We can't finalize those, however, until after the board has finalized an appeal, if that comes about. The actual ward boundaries have to be to the assessment, to the Municipal Property Assessment Corporation by January 1st of 2014, as does everything have to be approved by January 1st of 2014. But the actual delineation of the voting subdivisions and getting the information on all of the roll numbers reassigned to the appropriate subdivision numbers takes 6 to 9 months at best, because there's, as you can well imagine, a lot of work in actually transferring that information over. So we've actually targeted the fact that we would like to get that to impact by next September to give us some room to actually go back and validate that the data is correct, that they have everybody in the correct polling or voting subdivisions and everybody in the correct wards. We're also looking at the potential for internet voting in 2014, which only increases some of the pressures on getting the information right as early as possible. So we hoped, I hope that gives you sort of an indication of what we're up against in terms of timelines. And in order to meet those timelines, we'll have to reallocate some of the responsibilities for my staff and the GIS staff in the municipality as well.
I appreciate the detail, and I can hear the clock ticking.
Thank you, Councillor Giddings. Councillor Knoll.
Didn't know I was up so quickly. A couple questions. First of all, I tried to go back in my notes, and we've seen this report a few times now, and I just couldn't find the reference to asking of the question, the do-nothing question. When we went out to the public, did we ask the do-nothing question? And if we did, what was the response to that?
I evaluated the do-nothing question, in other words, the status quo, in the interim report, and it demonstrated, I think to my mind quite clearly, that if you do nothing, it won't fix itself. It will only get worse. The imbalances that are presently there, because of, as we all know, where the growth will happen, the imbalances that are in the present configuration will become more extreme rather than less extreme. My interpretation of your direction on February 21st was to look at the 4 options plus the map number 1, which by definition excluded the status quo. And we had, I can't recall that we had very much specific feedback on the status quo in those meetings way back in October, November. Certainly there was, I don't recall hearing or seeing many comments that said, leave it alone, it'll be fine. So I certainly did not take direction now to do that full analysis of the status quo.
I understand you were acting on instructions in your contract, so I'm not suggesting that you didn't fulfill that. I'm simply asking at this point, was that a question that was posed at any point to the public? So has the public, have our constituents rendered an opinion on the option of do nothing?
Certainly in the first round of public information meetings, the status quo was posted, and it was one of the maps that was there. Some discussion when we began those sessions about its characteristics, and we had the population projections as we've done in the others attached to those. And as far as I recall, there was no response from the public about that as something worth keeping.
So you've really seen no sort of outpouring of demand on the part of the public to make the change at this time, correct? Would that be a fair assessment of what you're saying?
Sorry, no outpouring to make the change?
Yeah, basically, during all your consultations and as you've been going out and presenting the report, I guess now we've gone through 3 rounds, I think, of public consultation. Have you heard any sort of outcry of a need for change at this point? I mean, clearly there is a need for change at some point in the future, but did you hear a cry for change today?
I don't know that I'd call it a cry, but everyone talked about changing. Yes, everyone that I heard was anxious to see those anomalies that were present addressed in some fashion. Yes.
Now, I just want to ask you about your numbers. In the, particularly Ward 5, I hadn't originally paid a lot of attention to numbers. I took them sort of as being, particularly at face value. But when I started to really play with the numbers this weekend, one of the things I noticed is that one of the projections is that Ward 5 is going to grow between 2011 and 2016 by 761.
Which option?
I think they're all, Ward 5 remains almost status quo in every one, so I think it's all of them. So between 2011 and 2016, the growth factored in for that ward was 761 people. So my question is, where did that number come from? I'm sorry. You can refer to it on 1A, for example, on page 59 of the agenda, or 13 of your report.
All the data we used came from GIS information related to regional best planning estimates.
Okay, so yeah, so the BPEs were what formulated the overall population projections.
And for the wards
and the wards themselves?
Yes. Yeah, and that's again where the GIS technology was used to be able to develop those numbers, and we used those consistently throughout, except where I made the typo.
It's interesting because we have in Ward 5, in all of the proposed Ward 5s, there's one building alone with more than 761 units, let alone 761 population. So I just found
planned.
That. Pardon me?
Planned building, you mean?
Yes, it's planned approved. It's and
again, I can only fall back on those numbers. So I don't claim any.
I'm not shooting the messenger. I'm just trying to, understand it.
No, it's okay.
My last question is probably best for, I'll use the pun again, best for best. Could I speak to the clerk for a moment, Mr. Mayor? Thank you. Clerk Best is always the best. She is the best. With respect to the financial implications of a change, we've heard some concern about changing now and then changing again in the future. I understand that in the financial implications portion of the report, it says that the money for the change is already allocated in the election reserve, but it's still tax dollars, or it's still dollars. What is the actual cost of a change? What would the cost be if there's always been a cost expended to date. What would the cost be going forward to facilitate a change for 2014?
The costs for 2014 were the review. The costs are associated with staff time and effort for the most part. And as I said, to actually draw the configurations for all the for the different ward boundaries and the subdivisions would take about 6 to 9 months of staff time. I haven't priced that out per salary, but that's fairly extensive. That would go on the salaries that are currently being paid. We haven't allocated those to the ward boundary at this point in time. Subsequent to the 2014 election, should regional council decide to do the regional representation be revised, we have indicated which of the two maps would have the minimal effort so that we wouldn't have to go in to a full ward boundary review again. We would just have to deal with the northern areas. But the actual cost for a ward boundary review and to do all of the work that goes into that is basically the staff time. And I would suggest that it's probably, I don't want to start talking about people's salaries, but it's extensive in terms of staff time.
And even if you're not talking about staff salaries, you are talking about opportunity cost as well, potentially the loss of opportunity cost if you're utilizing existing staff.
Exactly.
Which would have to be done all over again if we're successful, which we will be, in lobbying the region at some point down the road for additional seats.
In terms of, yeah, if we did, through you, Mr. Mayor, if we did get additional seat or seats, the way that the presentations have come forward on the two options, again, the staff time would be minimal on that because we could divide either on the option 3A, 4A, or the 4C, the northern boundaries, we could reconfigure those with fairly minimal impact on staff and voting subdivision boundaries in terms of a go forward. We do review of the subdivisions every election term, I have to admit, to ensure that we have the appropriate number of people and that it's manageable for the election. However, this will be a huge undertaking in that every property roll number has to be mapped to the applicable ward and subdivision boundary or subdivision by us. That's not an issue that MPAC does anymore. It's not that we can give them a GIS map and say, here's our new boundaries. We ourselves have to do that. So it will take time from GIS staff and time from the clerk's department staff as well.
You think it's a fair comment to suggest that in addition to, we've talked about the financial implications and the staffing implications, would it be fair to suggest that there would be a confusion factor amongst the public if we were to make a change over literally what could be 4 to 6 years in terms of having people acquainted with who the ward is, where the ward is located, what the number is, who the representatives are, etc.?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that was one of the reasons that council in the last term deferred the ward boundary review to this term because they didn't want back-to-back when we thought the regional representation was going to change. I think it was an initiative council that wanted us to come forward with the ward boundary review to actually address the inequities. And the way that we have proposed it is there's very few people living in those areas now. The population has not been, the housing has not been subdivided out or established. And in that case, it would be minimal disruption, both to mapping and individuals' perceptions of where they are in the ward system.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Knoll. Are there others? Councillor Bird? Oh, okay. I saw waving fingers and I wasn't sure.
Wasn't it me?
All right. Well, let's look for a Councillor Adams.
Just a question for you. In the existing report, I don't see the current numbers in terms of the population that we've got for 2011, 16, 21. But as I recall, there are, and if you look at the options 1A and so forth, there's obviously some wards that I'll say get an increased percentage of the overall poll or the overall vote, and others where their vote is diluted, if you will. Are you able to describe that to us in any way?
Your question is about the projections related to the status quo?
Well, we've got the current boundaries that we're living with right now.
Yes.
And under the various options that you presented, there are some areas of town that would, I'll say, have a net benefit in terms of getting an increased percentage of the overall vote. Their vote would count more, I'll say. And there are other areas where they'll become diluted. Are you able to describe that to us in any way?
I'm not sure I can respond directly. Again, maybe I'm not quite grasping the question. In the current configuration, We know where the growth areas are likely to be. They're much the same as we've described here. And as I said earlier, the ward, particularly Ward 4, the way it's currently drawn would end up becoming extremely large, like something like 1.5 times the size. Okay, sorry, we've got a map here. Current ward system would show the current Ward 5 as high as 57,000. With the current Ward 2 at 22,000. So that's why, in response to the
Right,
earlier question,
so those wards that are currently small.
would stay small.
Well, obviously, they'll stay small, they won't change. But if council was to choose one of the other options, their wards would become larger in population, and therefore their communities would lose some of the pull they might have.
Well, two things would happen. One of them is that those areas are now joined onto others. In particular, current Ward 2 is joined with other areas in a couple of these scenarios. The whole town is getting bigger. So if you will, the area, the number of people to whom councillors are accountable will increase across the board. It's just that without adjusting these figures, they will grow disproportionately in some parts of the town, and that's what we're trying to avoid. I'm still not sure I've understood your question. I'm sorry.
You sort of, I mean, it's sort of self-evident, but clearly those areas that Ward 2, for example, being split up the way it is in some of these options, that ward right now enjoys more representation for the size of its population than it would under one of the other options.
Yeah, and effective representation is to try to make sure that the opposite, if you will, the flip side of that is the case, that those people who are currently part of a much larger ward have better access to a councillor because they're not nearly as large.
So they're two sides of the same coin.
So, yes, and many of these choices involve some of that, yes.
Thank you, Councillor. Any others? Councillor Johnson?
Thank you, Mayor Burton, and thank you to everyone for all your comments and questions and input. I found it very interesting. I'm going to preface the motion I'm going to make with a couple of comments. I think we need to take a long-term view on this. I think we need to do it once. I think we need to do it right. I think we have to have minimal disruption for everybody concerned. I think we have to take into account the comments of Ms. Knight's remarks this evening, speaking for residents' associations, and also Ms. Best's comments about timing and how to implement it. And so, I am going to move that, one, that the May 2012 final report prepared by Dr. Robert Williams, the public input into ward boundary review, be received with thanks. Two, that option 7B be approved as the new 7-ward boundary configuration to come into effect when a 7th seat is at Halton Region is achieved. And 3, that the necessary bylaw to implement this decision be presented and passed at the council meeting of May 28, 2012. And it's quite self-evident what I'm going for.
Is there a seconder? Councillor Elgar. Councillor Elgar, did you want to speak to it as well?
Yes. Since Councillor Lapworth and I are in Ward 4, and I believe it's the largest ward, and I look at where we're going in the future, I can see Ward 4 is basically built out by 2014 and almost built out now. So I can't see the burden being a lot worse. However, I would like to see it change. However, based on what I've heard tonight also, I think the idea is to serve the community for the next 3 elections. And what I'm really hearing based on the results is this would be an interim stopgap till the next election. And for that reason, I will support your motion tonight to stay the status quo until, in fact, we have the 7th seat at the Regional Council. Thank you.
Councillor Knoll and then Councillor Giddings.
Thank you. First, a question of clarification on the motion. The endorsement of 7B, I just want to be perfectly clear. even though we'd be endorsing 7B, we're essentially endorsing it for a discussion point for some point in the future because we can't bind a future council. So I just want to be clear on that. That's correct, Mr. Mayor?
My view is that yes, you can, but a future council can change your determination.
Right.
Take a look at the proposition before you that you choose one of the three maps known as 1A, 4C, and 3A, 4A. Were you to choose one of those, you'd be binding a future council. So it may seem like a hair I'm splitting here, but you certainly can choose something for a future council, and a future council can change it if it doesn't like it.
So essentially, we're adopting 7B, so we've got some plan in the future, but we will always be mindful, and our those who come after us will adjust whatever they need to based on population growth and what actually happens. Okay, just want to be perfectly clear on that. So having clarified that, I want to say that I do support this motion. This has been, I think, kind of a difficult proposition. We've tried to redraw this map so many times, and I've not really ever seen anything that I've been satisfied with that I believe would truly reflect the interests of the overall community. Ward 5 has been rather unscathed almost every iteration of this report, but of course, as an individual member of council, which will be my next point, as an individual member of council, I'm not voting necessarily for Ward 5 and for the interests of Ward 5. I have to be as concerned about the Kerr Street community and maybe even Bronte, I don't know. But I have to take that into consideration, and we all do. So we can't be making decisions based on our local neighborhoods. So having said that, I do want to just make a point, and I have not heard a great outcry from my constituents or from our constituents in Ward 5 that this is something that they want, nor have I heard anybody from across town. There's not a lot of people in this auditorium or in this council chamber this evening, and none of the meetings were particularly well attended. What we do hear from members of the community about is they don't want us wasting money, they don't want us wasting resources, and I think that making a change twice is wasting a lot of resources and a lot of time when we know we're going to be revisiting this, or the people who replace us, if we're not around. We know Councillor Robinson and Councillor Bird will probably be here for another 20 years, but those who come after us will, we'll have to deal with this yet again. And I think that's just wasting a lot of time and money when we're simply just we're moving lines. And in the grand scheme of things, I don't think it really changes much in terms of the representation. We swear an oath of office which says we represent the town of Oakville. We don't represent Ward 5 or Ward 2 or Ward 3. Certainly don't represent Ward 1. I'm just kidding. But we do. I can just see the Bronte people from here. So I think we have to keep that in mind. So we talk about effective representation. The fact is that if we're effectively representing the community, we're representing all the wards. So I don't see how any of that changes based on geography. I think the bigger issue, frankly, is caseload, and that's something that is certainly daunting for those of us in the north, particularly wards, well, all three of the wards, I should say, particularly Ward 4. But I think that's something that can be managed while we wait for exactly what's going to occur in north of Dundas. And from my perspective, as one of those 6 councillors, I'm perfectly prepared to work with the caseload for the balance of my term. And if I have a chance to be here again in the future, deal with it at that time.
Councillor Giddings.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm just looking for clarification. I understand and appreciate option 7B. I see it as being very similar to 4C with the future in mind. And I'm just looking for clarification in terms of what that means for the 2014 election.
The councillor's motion would keep the current wards for 2014, anticipating, I gather, that for the 2018 election, we would have succeeded in addressing the shortage of representation we have at the regional council by adding another regional council seat, which would imply an additional ward, which is what the professor designed for us. The clerk or the council? Any other members of council? Councillor Bird.
Just picking up on my colleague, Councillor Knoll, and having, I guess this is my 4th time going through ward boundary reviews, and this is the one that seems to have created the least amount of acrimony, and hopefully got it right. I think you're right. You never get it perfect. There's always, because you superimpose yourself on these areas, but I think we've got the issue of community of interest basically aligned. But I think the comment being here in 20 years, I just started to think about it. I just like to be anywhere in 20 years from now, and believe me, I don't think be sitting here and have to do it again. But each time we've looked at it, we felt that that was the last time, and then something changed. And one was the biggest change was, quite frankly, to accommodate regional government. And now I see, fast forward, this is 30 some odd years later, we're still predicated on where our representation at regional government, because the regional government fundamentally changed the makeup of this council back then. Some of you weren't here, but I was, when you had Reeves and Deputy Reeves sitting around this council, who represented the council at large, which addressed at that point in time some of the concerns of Mr. Hopkins, that when you had 3 members of council running town-wide, you didn't get into the parochialism as much as we've now developed. The only person who runs town-wide is the mayor's seat. But we know the change is coming. We know that in all likelihood we're going to get another MP seat. That we're going to be affected. We're going to be affected by an MLA, and the inequity of at the regional seat of the representation of the town of Milton has to be addressed pretty soon. It's glaringly embarrassing that they've only have 3 representatives, but they're now almost half the size of Burlington, so in Oakville. So I'm going to go with the option. I like the idea with some little forward planning that we basically have gone the status quo. The biggest changes I see is the effect on Ward 2, where that they've created a little piece of land in the north, which is not unusual. When I started, we had the 3-ward system, and Ward 1 went to Milton overnight. That didn't come back, but so you talk about change. We had members of council on one evening were here, and en masse, the 4 of them then went up north. We were sitting in the Milton Council the following week, but that was the changes. So this is a lot less than that. I think we've got it pretty well light, and I can support the motion on the floor.
Thank you, Councillor Ward. Clerk Best.
Mr. Mayor, I understand the intent of the motion. I just have one concern in that we would not be able to bring the bylaw for passage until the term of the council that was going to actually endorse it for the next election, whereas this council can actually adopt that scenario for future upon regional representation changing. I believe in Councillor Johnston's motion, item 3 or clause 3 was to bring forward the necessary bylaw. We would not do that until the applicable council comes in to actually address and endorse that bylaw.
I think the councillor meant to bring the bylaw at the appropriate time. Right, Councillor? Yes. And the clerk will be happy with that language? All right. So everybody's clear with that. Any other speakers? Yes, you can, just by asking for it. Is it time to take the vote? Any other speakers? Then it is time to take the vote. To vote in favor of the resolution, please rise to be named. Councillor Kahn, Councillor Adams, Councillor Grant, Councillor Knoll, Councillor Lapworth, Councillor Elgar, Mayor Burton, Councillor Giddings, Councillor Bird, Councillor DeMoff, Councillor Duddick, Councillor Robinson, and Councillor Johnston. That carries. Thank you very much, Council. Council, that brings us to item C1. And I'm sorry, C2, I misspeak, we passed C1. And in the case of C2, I believe that you will want to hear advice from your solicitor that's privileged because of being a solicitor client. And I would, if you agree, I need a mover and a seconder to go into, thank you, Councillor Johnston and Councillor DeMoff. This is a motion to go into a meeting closed to the public for the receiving advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose, and for the purpose of dealing with a matter pertaining to litigation or potential litigation with respect to item C2. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Madam Clerk, would you arrange the chamber for a meeting closed to the public? All right, we now resume our public session of council, having met in a session closed to the public for the purpose of receiving advice subject to solicitor-client privilege considering litigation or potential litigation, which is one of the permitted uses of a closed meeting under the Municipal Act. And this dealt with item C2. And now we need a mover and seconder for the following motion: that the confidential report of the legal department dated May 3rd, 2012 be received. Councillor Duddick moves it. Councillor Knoll seconds it. All in favor? Opposed, if any. The report is adopted, or received, I'm sorry. And that brings us to our information items, which have been circulated electronically. Our status of outstanding issues, which you also have had already. And we have, Council, a notice of motion. Councillor Robinson?
I have a question on the outstanding issues at some point.
I beg your pardon?
I have a question on one of the outstanding issue items.
Now is the time.
It's the one. It's on page 122, and it's the tanning salon. The status report says pending outcome of provincial private members bill, but the motion that this council passed was that we go ahead and research what, if anything, we should be doing. So I don't see why that should be together with the province, because they're so slow and will take them 6 months. I think we should go ahead and do what we moved to do.
All right. Let's ask staff how long what their advice is on the matter.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we're holding off actually investigating pending a first determination of whether or not the province will be moving actively on the private members bill. We anticipate that if they do not move in a fairly prompt manner, then staff will be coming back with their report on the matter. But the issue of regulations and how we'd go about introducing those, if indeed the provincial legislation came into play, it would supersede ours regardless. So we are at the current time just monitoring where that private members bill is going. If indeed it looks like it's not going anywhere, staff will be reporting back in due course, and it will not delay it unjustly by any stretch of the imagination.
Your Worship, thanks for that. I would just like to see our motion followed, regardless.
All right. Councillor Dumont, did you have something else?
I was just going to say, this is her third kick at the can with this private members bill, so the likelihood of it going anywhere is probably just as likely as the previous 2 times she's tried. So I completely agree with Councillor Robinson. It shouldn't be holding up what we're doing.
Well, let's let staff make a determination about that, and if they discover the same thing that you've said, perhaps they'll be back as they said. Alternatively, you can direct otherwise.
The determination. I have nothing further to say.
Staff have heard you. I won't ask for anything else. That brings us to new business, and we have a notice of motion brought by Councillor Pam Demoff and seconded by Councillor Alan Elgar. And they indicated to me when they distributed it this evening that they were content to put it through the regular procedure, and it would come to us for a vote in the due course at the next council meeting. And council, is that your wish? Are you satisfied with that? All right. That then brings us to regional reports and question period regarding town boards and advisory committees. Are there any questions or reports? And then we have requests for reports this evening. We have 2 from the ever-industrious councillors of Ward 1. Councillor Robinson and Councillor Johnston seek that staff be requested to bring forward a report to a future community services meeting on limiting the use of amplified sound systems associated with the Oakville Longhorns home games at Bronny Athletic Field Park after 5 p.m. And Council, how do you say on this report? All those in favor of granting this report, please raise your hands. I need them higher so I can count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Those against, if any? Well, it carries. Abstentions count as nays, but nevertheless, there were enough positives that it carries. The second request for report is the Bronny Harbor Fish Weighing Facility, that staff be requested to bring forward a report to a future community services meeting on constructing a fish weighing facility at Bronny Harbor to facilitate the weighing and storage of fish caught by local fishermen or as part of any fish-related derby in Lake Ontario. Councillor Robinson.
If I could just speak to that and the previous one, Your Worship. Actually, Alan and I have been meeting and having other meetings regarding these two important issues, and the commissioner has asked us to bring this forward as a request for a report, and that's why it's here.
Yes, Councillor Giddings.
Quick question through you, Mr. Mayor, is I understand a weighing station. You also mentioned a storage. So is this going to be like down in Port Credit where you have fish cleaning and so on, or is it just a scale?
As far as I'm concerned, it's just a weighing station. I wasn't aware that they wanted us to store. We have another meeting with them tomorrow.
Well, Councillor Robinson, Councillor Giddings is pointing out to you that in your request, you mentioned the word storage. And
I did, because that was information that I got this afternoon from the commissioner, which I wasn't aware of before.
I see. So I think Councillor Giddings just wants to know if you want to put any dimensions on that or details.
I would just as soon leave the motion the way it's been presented now as recommended to us by the commissioner, and we're meeting with the group tomorrow.
Very well. Thank you. Councillor Giddings.
Could we ask the commissioner?
Sure.
Mr. Mayor, the report certainly would look at a request that we have from a local supplier in that area who's interested in for sure a weigh scale system. We need to confirm whether or not that includes a program similar to that in Port Credit, which would also include cutting up the fish, for lack of better words, but and the need for storage, because it's our understanding if it gets weighed and it meets a certain requirement, it does need to be stored. But we will get more information as suggested by the Ward 1 councillors tomorrow, and we'll be able to report back. So I'm satisfied with the term, the way the request to report is written, and we will certainly report back.
All right then. Any other comments on this? Councillor Demoff? No. Then all those in favor of authorizing the report, please vote yes. Those against, if any, the report is authorized. Thank you for your time and attention on that, Council. Now, if we could have a mover and seconder for the bylaws. Councillor Knoll and Councillor Grant, thank you. This is for the following bylaws: 2012-20, 24, 29, 33, 41, and 49 as detailed in the agenda. And all those in favor? Opposed, if any? The bylaws are carried. That completes our agenda. Thank you for your time and attention. It's been great working with you this evening.